The morning sun had barely broken over the horizon when Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Naval Training Facility in Coronado, California. She was 24 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in mechanical engineering, and this was her first day as a civilian contractor working alongside one of the most elite military units in the world. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel of her Honda Civic, pulling into the parking lot that was already half filled with military vehicles and trucks bearing the insignia of the United States Navy. Sarah had always been drawn to challenging environments. Growing up in rural Montana, she had spent her childhood climbing trees, fixing farm equipment with her father, and competing in every sport her small high school offered. Her mother often joked that Sarah had been born with grease under her fingernails and determination in her blood. When the opportunity came to work as a technical specialist for Navy SEAL training operations, evaluating new equipment and safety protocols, Sarah jumped at it without hesitation. She knew it would be demanding, but she had no idea just how much this job would test everything she thought she knew about herself. The security checkpoint was her first real taste of military protocol. Two stern-faced guards examined her credentials with the kind of thoroughness that made her feel like she was entering a foreign country rather than just a naval base. They asked her questions, checked her identification against their lists, and, finally, waved her through with instructions to report to Building 7. Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel, and drove slowly through the base, taking in the sprawling complex of structures, training grounds, and obstacle courses that stretched in every direction. Building 7 was a nondescript concrete structure that looked like it had been standing since World War II. Inside, the air conditioning provided blessed relief from the already warming California morning. A receptionist directed her down a long corridor to an office where she would meet her supervisor, Commander Patricia Hayes. Sarah knocked twice on the door marked with the commander's name and rank. Commander Hayes was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper demeanor. She stood when Sarah entered, extending a firm handshake that communicated both welcome and warning. This was someone who expected excellence and wouldn't tolerate anything less. After brief introductions, Commander Hayes got straight to business, explaining that Sarah would be embedded with training units to assess equipment performance under real conditions. Her engineering background made her uniquely qualified to understand both the technical specifications and the practical applications of the gear these sailors would depend on in life-or-death situations. The first week passed in a blur of orientation sessions, safety briefings, and equipment familiarization. Sarah learned about ballistic helmets, communication systems, tactical vests, underwater breathing apparatus, and dozens of other pieces of specialized gear. She took notes obsessively, asked questions, and stayed late every evening reviewing technical manuals. The other civilian contractors were friendly enough, mostly older men with decades of experience in military contracting. But Sarah felt the weight of being not just the youngest person in her role, but also one of the few women working directly with combat training units. It was during her second week that Sarah first encountered the team that would change everything. She had been assigned to observe a standard training exercise involving maritime infiltration techniques. The exercise would test new helmet-mounted communication systems in wet conditions, and Sarah's job was to monitor performance, collect data, and note any issues that arose. She arrived at the training area an hour before the scheduled start time, wanting to ensure all her monitoring equipment was properly set up and calibrated. The SEAL candidates began arriving in small groups, their faces serious and focused. These were men who had already survived some of the most grueling selection processes in the military world. They moved with a quiet confidence that came from knowing they were among the best. Sarah tried to stay out of their way, positioning herself near the instructor station where she could observe without interfering. Then he arrived. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Brennan was impossible not to notice. He was tall, probably 6'3", with broad shoulders and the kind of presence that seemed to make the air around him feel heavier. His face was weathered from years of sun and salt water, with lines around his eyes that suggested both humor and hardship. When he spoke, his voice carried across the training ground with natural authority. This was a man who had spent over 15 years in the Navy SEALs, with multiple combat deployments and more experienced than most of the younger instructors combined. Sarah had read his file the previous evening. Jake Brennan had earned numerous commendations, survived operations in some of the world's most hostile environments, and was now responsible for training the next generation of special warfare operators. His reputation was legendary. Some called him the best tactical instructor in the Navy. Others said he was impossibly demanding, pushing candidates to their absolute limits and beyond. Everyone agreed on one thing, though: he never asked anyone to do something he couldn't or wouldn't do himself. The morning briefing was concise and professional. Jake outlined the day's objectives, reviewed safety protocols, and assigned teams. His eyes swept across the assembled group, pausing briefly when they landed on Sarah. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away or seem intimidated. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. And then he continued with the briefing. The exercise began with water confidence drills. Sarah watched as the candidates entered the pool in full gear, practicing equipment handling while submerged. Her monitors showed the helmet communication systems working perfectly, with clear audio transmission even underwater. She made notes on her tablet, documenting performance metrics and environmental conditions. Everything was going according to plan. Then came the transition to the ocean training area. This was where things got real. The Pacific Ocean was cold, even in summer, and the swells were running higher than usual. The candidates would be performing shipboarding techniques, scaling rope nets while being pounded by waves, and weighted down with equipment. It was exhausting, dangerous work that simulated the conditions they might face in actual operations. Sarah had been cleared to observe from a safety boat positioned nearby. She wore a life jacket and had been given basic instructions on emergency procedures, though she had been assured that with so many qualified personnel present, her intervention would never be needed. She climbed aboard the small, rigid-hull inflatable boat, clutching her waterproof equipment case, and trying not to think about the fact that she had never been particularly comfortable in deep water. The exercise progressed smoothly for the first hour. The candidates took turns approaching the mock vessel, timing their movements with the swells, and hauling themselves up the netting with impressive strength and coordination. Sarah's equipment recorded everything, and she focused on her data collection, trying to ignore the way the boat rocked beneath her feet. Jake Brennan supervised from the primary safety vessel, his voice occasionally crackling over the radio with corrections or encouragement. Sarah found herself paying attention to his instructions, noting how he balanced pushing the candidates hard while never compromising their safety. There was a method to his approach, a deep understanding of how to build capability without breaking people. She had to admit, grudgingly, that he was very good at his job. Midway through the morning, Commander Hayes's voice came over Sarah's radio, requesting an equipment status update. Sarah confirmed that all systems were performing within parameters and that she had collected excellent data so far. The commander seemed pleased, reminding Sarah to stay alert and continue documenting everything. Sarah acknowledged and returned her attention to the exercise. That's when she noticed something unusual. One of the candidates was struggling more than the others. He had made it halfway up the netting but seemed to be having difficulty coordinating his movements. His breathing was labored. Even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong. Sarah leaned forward, instinctively concerned, though she knew the instructors would have noticed as well. Jake's voice came over the radio immediately, calm but commanding. He was already moving, directing the safety swimmer to stand by. The candidate, a young man named Phillips according to the roster Sarah had reviewed, was given 30 seconds to recover and continue. If he couldn't, he would be pulled from the water and evaluated. Phillips gathered himself and pushed upward, making it another few feet before his strength gave out completely. The safety swimmer was there in seconds, supporting Phillips and helping him down to the water. Another boat moved in to extract him. Sarah watched the rescue operation unfold with professional precision. Phillips was brought aboard the safety vessel, checked by the medical corpsman, and determined to be suffering from muscle cramps and exhaustion but otherwise unharmed. Jake made the call to rotate in a fresh candidate and continue the exercise. The entire incident had been handled in less than 3 minutes. Sarah was impressed despite herself. This was exactly the kind of professional competence she had expected, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. These men took care of their own. No one was mocking Phillips for struggling. Instead, there was a collective understanding that everyone had limits, and today Phillips had found his. He would recover, learn from it, and come back stronger. The rest of the morning passed without incident. By noon, the candidates were exhausted but successful, having all completed the required number of climbs. They returned to shore for a brief rest period and lunch before the afternoon session would begin. Sarah packed up her monitoring equipment and made her way back to the beach, where she could upload her data and begin preliminary analysis. She was reviewing readings on her laptop when a shadow fell across her screen. Looking up, she found Jake Brennan standing a few feet away, arms crossed, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had seemed from a distance. Salt water still dripped from his wet suit, and his eyes were the same steel-gray color as the ocean behind him. "You're the new contractor," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mitchell, right?" "The engineer." Sarah nodded, closing her laptop and standing to face him properly. She refused to be intimidated, even though he towered over her 5'6" frame. "That's right. Sarah Mitchell. I'm evaluating the helmet communication systems." "And how are they performing?" His tone was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "Perfectly so far," Sarah replied. "Audio clarity is excellent, even in wet conditions and high-noise environments. The mounting system is secure. I haven't seen any issues." She paused, then added, "Your team handles the equipment well. That makes my job easier." Something that might have been approval flickered across Jake's face. "Good equipment is important, but it's only as reliable as the people using it. My job is to make sure these candidates can handle anything that gets thrown at them, equipment failures included." Sarah understood the unspoken message. Her technology was useful, but it would never replace proper training and human capability. She actually agreed with that philosophy, though she wasn't about to say so out loud. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "I'm looking forward to observing the afternoon session." Jake studied her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "Stay sharp. Afternoon drills are more complex. Things can go wrong faster." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing on the beach wondering if that had been friendly advice or a subtle warning that she wasn't quite prepared for what was coming. The afternoon session did indeed prove more challenging. The exercise moved from basic boarding techniques to a full scenario-based drill involving multiple objectives, time pressure, and deliberately introduced complications. Sarah found herself working harder to track everything that was happening, her monitors and equipment struggling to capture the full scope of the operation. The candidates moved through the exercise with impressive coordination, adapting to changing conditions and supporting each other through difficult moments. By the time the exercise concluded, Sarah was mentally exhausted despite not having done any of the physical work. She had pages of notes, gigabytes of data, and a new appreciation for just how demanding this training really was. As she packed up her equipment for the day, she felt a strange mix of satisfaction and inadequacy. She had done her job well, but she was still very much an outsider looking in on a world she could observe but never truly enter. That evening, back in her small apartment off base, Sarah reviewed her findings and began drafting her first weekly report. The helmet communication systems had performed flawlessly, which was good news for the manufacturer and for the Navy. She documented every metric, included relevant screenshots and data charts, and provided her professional assessment. It was solid work, the kind of thorough analysis she had built her reputation on during her brief career. But as she worked, Sarah's mind kept drifting back to the day's observations. She thought about Phillips struggling on the netting, about the seamless rescue operation, about Jake Brennan's commanding presence and unreadable expressions. There was something about this environment that called to a part of her she hadn't known existed. It wasn't just about the engineering anymore. She was beginning to understand that working with these people, in this place, was going to change her in ways she couldn't yet predict. The following weeks established a rhythm. Sarah would arrive early, set up her equipment, observe training operations, collect data, and analyze results. She was professional, thorough, and increasingly confident in her role. The other contractors accepted her, the instructors tolerated her presence, and the candidates largely ignored her, which was exactly how things should be. She was there to evaluate equipment, not to be part of the team. Jake Brennan remained a distant but ever-present figure. He ran his training sessions with clockwork precision, pushed his candidates relentlessly, and maintained standards that seemed impossibly high. Sarah watched him work with growing respect. He never yelled unnecessarily, never belittled anyone, but he also never accepted less than complete commitment. When candidates failed, he made them understand why and gave them the tools to improve. When they succeeded, his approval was measured but genuine. Sarah's reports began to gain attention. Commander Hayes forwarded them up the chain of command, and Sarah received commendations for the quality and usefulness of her analysis. She was asked to expand her evaluation to other equipment systems, which meant spending even more time embedded with training units. Her knowledge of SEAL operations grew deeper, and she began to anticipate needs before being asked, suggesting evaluation protocols and identifying potential issues before they became problems. It was during her sixth W everything was proceeding according to plan when Commander Hayes appeared beside Sarah in the observation area. The commander had come to personally observe this particular drill because the tactical vest system being evaluated represented a significant investment, and higher command wanted assurances that it would perform as advertised. Sarah quickly briefed her on what she had observed so far, showing her the data streams and explaining the metrics being tracked. Commander Hayes nodded approvingly, watching the drill through the ballistic glass. Below them, Jake was resetting the next scenario, positioning candidates, and explaining the specific challenges they would face. His voice carried clearly through the audio system, patient but firm as he corrected stances and reminded them of proper procedures. The commander commented that Brennan was one of the finest instructors she had ever worked with, a sentiment Sarah had heard echoed by many others on the base. The next run through the scenario was more complicated. Jake had introduced additional variables, including simulated equipment failures and unexpected threats. The candidates had to adapt on the fly, making split-second decisions under pressure. Sarah watched her monitors intensely, noting how the vests held up as the wearers dove for cover, rolled, and moved through tight spaces. The equipment was performing well, better than the previous generation they were replacing. Then, Jake did something unexpected. He called for a modification to the drill. He wanted to test the vests under even more demanding conditions, specifically looking at what happened during hand-to-hand conflict scenarios where candidates might be grabbed, pulled, or struck directly on the vest itself. This wasn't part of Sarah's original evaluation protocol, but Commander Hayes immediately agreed it was valuable information to gather. If these vests were going to be used in real operations, they needed to hold up in every possible situation. Jake selected 2 of his most experienced candidates for the demonstration. These were men who had been through the program before and were now serving as assistant instructors, helping train the newer candidates. They knew how to make contact drills look realistic without actually injuring each other, a skill that took years to develop. Sarah adjusted her monitoring parameters to capture the new data, grateful that her equipment was flexible enough to adapt to changing requirements. The demonstration began with grappling techniques. The 2 men circled each other in a simulated room-clearing scenario where one had run out of ammunition and engaged in close combat. They grabbed tactical vest straps, tried to unbalance each other, and demonstrated how to maintain weapon retention while being physically attacked. Sarah's sensors registered the stress points on the vests, measuring how much force the material could withstand before failing. Jake watched critically, occasionally stopping the action to make corrections or point out details to the observing candidates. He was explaining how a vest design could either help or hinder a wearer during close-quarters combat when Commander Hayes' phone rang. She excused herself to take the call, moving to the back of the observation area where she could speak without disturbing the drill. Sarah continued monitoring her equipment, making detailed notes about the vest performance. The data was excellent. These vests were holding up remarkably well, even better than the specifications had promised. She would be able to write a very positive report, which would please both the manufacturer and the Navy Procurement Office. Lost in her analysis, Sarah didn't immediately notice when Jake called for a brief break to reset the scenario again. When she looked up, Jake was speaking with one of the senior instructors, gesturing toward the observation area. Sarah felt a sudden chill of apprehension. Were they looking at her? Had she done something wrong? She checked her positioning, making sure she was still in the designated safe area. Everything seemed fine, but the way Jake was looking in her direction made her distinctly uncomfortable. The senior instructor nodded at whatever Jake had said and moved off to prepare the next phase of the drill. Jake walked directly toward the observation area, his expression unreadable. Sarah's heart rate picked up slightly. Commander Hayes was still on her phone call, not paying attention to what was happening on the training floor. Sarah was on her own for whatever was coming. Jake's voice came through the intercom system. "Mitchell, I need you down here." Sarah blinked in surprise. That wasn't part of the plan. Observers stayed in the observation area. That was protocol. She keyed her own microphone. "Sir, I'm positioned according to the safety briefing. I can monitor everything from here." "I understand that," Jake replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "But I want to test something that requires your direct participation." Commander Hayes approved it. He gestured toward where the commander was standing, phone still pressed to her ear. Hayes must have given approval during her phone conversation, though Sarah had no idea what she had agreed to. With a deep breath, Sarah secured her monitoring equipment and made her way down to the training floor. The door from the observation area opened into a side corridor, and she followed it to the main entrance of the active training space. The smell of gun oil, sweat, and concrete dust hit her immediately. This was different from watching through glass. This was real, immediate, and, suddenly, much more intimidating. Jake was waiting for her near the center of the training area. Up close, surrounded by the tools of his trade, he seemed even larger and more formidable. The other instructors and candidates watched with curiosity as Sarah approached. She was very aware that she was wearing civilian clothes, safety glasses, and ear protection, while everyone else was in full tactical gear. She felt absurdly out of place. "Here's the situation," Jake began without preamble. "We need to test how these vests perform when worn by someone with a different body type and size. All our testers so far have been men between 5'10" and 6'4". That's not realistic. In real operations, we work with people of all sizes, including female operators, intelligence personnel, and embedded civilians. I want to see how the vest adjusts and performs on someone smaller." Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to wear one of the test vests?" "That's correct. We'll run a modified scenario. Nothing dangerous. You'll move through a basic room-clearing exercise while we monitor how the vest fits, moves, and distributes weight. Your equipment can record from sensors built into the vest itself. It'll give us valuable data we wouldn't otherwise have." It made sense from an engineering perspective. Sarah had to admit that. But the thought of putting on tactical gear and moving through a live training scenario, even a modified one, was terrifying. She wasn't trained for this. She was an engineer, not a combat operator. What if she screwed up and looked foolish in front of all these highly skilled professionals? Jake seemed to read her hesitation. "Mitchell, you've been watching us for 6 weeks. You've seen how we operate, how we maintain safety protocols. I'm not asking you to do anything actually dangerous. But if you're going to evaluate equipment that people trust their lives to, shouldn't you understand what it feels like to actually use it?" That argument hit home. Sarah had always believed in hands-on evaluation whenever possible. She had crawled under cars, tested machinery in extreme conditions, and pushed herself physically to understand how equipment performed in the real world. This was just an extension of that philosophy. Besides, refusing would make her look timid and unprofessional. She had worked too hard to build credibility here to throw it away now. "All right," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Walk me through what I need to do." Over the next 15 minutes, Jake and one of the female support staff members helped Sarah into a tactical vest. They adjusted the straps, showed her how to secure the various attachment points, and made sure everything fit properly. The vest was heavy, much heavier than Sarah had expected. She could feel it pulling on her shoulders and back, redistributing her center of gravity. Her respect for the candidates who wore this gear for hours at a time increased exponentially. Jake handed her an unloaded training weapon, showing her how to hold it safely and Move with it. He emphasized that she would not be firing anything. The weapon was simply there to add realistic weight and help her understand how the vest interacted with equipment handling. Sarah nodded, trying to absorb the crash course in tactical movement he was providing. The scenario he had designed was simple. Sarah would enter a room, move to a designated point, take a knee behind cover, and then move to an exit point. No threats, no live ammunition, nothing complicated. But even this basic movement required coordination Sarah had never developed. The vest restricted her range of motion, the weapon was awkward in her hands, and she felt clumsy and slow. Don't overthink it, Jake instructed. Just move naturally. We're testing the equipment, not you. There's no way to fail this as long as you follow the safety protocols. Sarah took her position at the entry point. Through the doorway, she could see the room layout exactly as Jake had described. Behind her, several instructors and candidates had gathered to watch. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on her breathing and the simple sequence of movements she needed to execute. Jake counted down from 3, and on his signal, Sarah moved. Immediately, everything felt wrong. The vest shifted as she moved through the doorway, not dramatically, but enough to throw off her balance slightly. She compensated, took 2 steps forward, and the weapon slipped in her grip. She had to stop and readjust, losing the rhythm Jake had shown her. Behind her, she heard someone stifle a laugh. Her face burned with embarrassment. "Keep moving, Mitchell," Jake's voice called out. "You're doing fine." Sarah pushed forward, reaching the cover point and dropping to one knee as instructed. The vest rode up slightly, and she felt one of the shoulder straps digging uncomfortably. She made a mental note for her report. The vest needed better adjustment mechanisms for users outside the standard size range. Standing again took more effort than it should have. The added weight of the vest made her movements sluggish. She completed the scenario by moving to the exit point, where Jake was waiting. Sarah's heart was pounding, and she was slightly out of breath despite the minimal physical exertion. The experience had been humbling and educational in equal measure. She now understood in a visceral way what wearing this equipment felt like. Information she could never have gained from observation alone. "Good," Jake said simply. He helped her remove the vest, checking the adjustment points, and asking specific questions about where she had felt pressure, restriction, or discomfort. Sarah answered honestly, her engineering mind already cataloging improvements that could be made. Jake nodded at her observations, making notes of his own. Commander Hayes appeared, having finished her phone call. She looked pleased to see Sarah in the training area, surrounded by tactical gear. "Excellent initiative, Brennan. This is exactly the kind of comprehensive testing we need. Mitchell, I trust you'll incorporate this first-hand experience into your evaluation?" "Absolutely, ma'am," Sarah replied, grateful that the commander seemed to view this as a positive development rather than a deviation from protocol. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sarah returned to her monitoring equipment with a completely new perspective on everything she had been observing. The data took on deeper meaning now that she had personal context for what it represented. She worked late into the evening, updating her analysis and adding detailed notes about the vest's performance on different body types. When she finally packed up to leave, most of the base was quiet. Sarah was walking toward her car when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Jake approaching through the dim parking lot. He had changed out of his tactical gear into standard Navy working uniform. But he still moved with that same purposeful stride. "Mitchell," he called out. "Wait a moment." Sarah stopped, suddenly, nervous about this unexpected encounter. In the privacy of the parking lot, away from other personnel, Jake seemed different somehow. Less the stern instructor, more just a person. "I wanted to apologize," he said, which was absolutely the last thing Sarah had expected to hear. "I put you on the spot today without much warning. That wasn't entirely fair. You handled it well, but I should have given you more time to prepare." Sarah was stunned. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Brennan, legendary SEAL instructor, was apologizing to her? It's fine," she managed. "Actually, it was valuable. I understand the equipment better now. The experience will make my evaluation more accurate." Jake nodded slowly. "That was my thinking. But, still, I could have communicated better. You're doing good work here, Mitchell. The team has noticed. Your reports are thorough and useful. That matters." He paused, Then, added, not many civilians would have agreed to put on that vest and step into the training area. Took guts. The compliment, coming from him, meant more than Sarah wanted to admit. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Jake, he corrected. When we're not in front of the candidates, you can call me Jake. Sir makes me feel ancient. Sarah smiled despite herself. You don't seem ancient. I feel it some days, Jake replied with unexpected candor. 15 years of this career ages you faster than you'd think. But I'm not ready to hang it up yet. Too much work left to do. He shifted his weight, seeming to debate whether to say more. Listen, we're running a specialized drill next week. Urban navigation with communications challenges. It would be perfect for testing your helmet systems under more demanding conditions. Interested? Definitely, Sarah responded immediately. What kind of conditions? Building penetration, multiple floors, heavy structural interference. We'll be working in an old industrial complex off base that we use for realistic training. Cell signals don't penetrate well, lots of concrete and metal. If your comm systems work there, they'll work anywhere. Sarah's engineering mind was already racing with the testing possibilities. That sounds perfect. I'll need to prepare additional monitoring equipment and coordinate with the manufacturer for. Jake held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. We can work out the details tomorrow. Right now, you should go home and get some rest. Today was more physically demanding than you're used to. Trust me, you'll feel it tomorrow. He was right, of course. Sarah's shoulders and back were already starting to ache from the brief time wearing the vest. Good advice. I'll see you tomorrow then. Jake. Something shifted in his expression, too subtle to identify in the dim parking lot lighting. See you tomorrow, Sarah. She watched him walk away toward his own vehicle, a sturdy pickup truck that somehow perfectly matched his personality. As Sarah drove home that night, her mind was spinning with thoughts that had nothing to do with equipment evaluation. Something had changed in her relationship with Jake Brennan. They had crossed some invisible line from purely professional to something more complex. Sarah wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but she knew with absolute certainty that things were going to get more complicated. The following days proved her intuition correct. Jake began consulting with Sarah more frequently on training scenarios, asking her input on how to maximize equipment testing while maintaining training objectives. She found herself spending more time in direct communication with him, often working late in the planning rooms as they designed evaluation protocols for the upcoming urban navigation drill. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond pure logistics. Sarah learned that Jake had grown up in Colorado, joined the Navy at 18, and had spent most of his adult life in special operations. He was divorced, a fact he mentioned casually when explaining why he often worked late. His ex-wife had struggled with the demands of military life, the long deployments, and the constant uncertainty. The marriage had ended 5 years ago, and Jake had thrown himself even deeper into his work afterward. Sarah found herself sharing details of her own life in return. Her family's farm in Montana, her father's influence on her engineering career, her mother's initial disappointment that Sarah had chosen military contracting over civilian industry. Jake listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and making connections she hadn't expected him to see. Eke that everything changed. Sarah had been assigned to evaluate a new tactical vest system during a close-quarters combat drill. The exercise would take place in the Kill House, a specially designed training facility where candidates practiced room-clearing techniques using simunition, non-lethal ammunition that allowed for realistic training with actual weapons. It was dangerous work, even with safety measures in place, and Sarah had gone through extensive briefings on where she could position herself and what protocols to follow. The urban navigation drill was scheduled for early Thursday morning, which meant Sarah spent most of Wednesday preparing her equipment and reviewing the facility layout. The industrial complex Jake had mentioned was located about 30 miles inland, a sprawling abandoned manufacturing plant that had been converted into a realistic training environment. The Navy had leased the property years ago specifically for this purpose, and it had become one of the premier locations for urban warfare training on the West Coast. Sarah drove out to the site the evening before the drill to set up her monitoring stations. Jake had offered to have some of his support team help with the installation, and Sarah had gratefully accepted. The facility was massive, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways and open courtyards. Each building had several floors, creating a three-dimensional maze that would challenge even experienced operators. The support team consisted of 3 sailors, all specialists in communications and technical systems. They worked efficiently under Sarah's direction, placing remote sensors throughout the facility and running cable to her central monitoring station. One of them, a petty officer named Rodriguez, was particularly helpful, offering suggestions based on previous exercises he had supported. Sarah took notes, appreciating the practical insights. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the industrial complex, Jake arrived to inspect the setup. He moved through the facility with practiced ease, checking sight lines and entry points while Sarah explained her monitoring strategy. He asked good questions, pushing her to think about edge cases and potential failures. By the time they finished the walkthrough, Sarah felt confident her equipment would capture everything needed. "This is solid work," Jake commented as they stood in what would be Sarah's observation post the next morning. From this position, she could see 3 of the main buildings and had access to all the remote sensor feeds. "You've thought through the scenarios well. This data will be valuable." "I had good input," Sarah replied, meaning it as professional courtesy, but immediately worrying it sounded like she was flirting. She quickly added, "Rodriguez and his team really understood what was needed." Jake smiled slightly, a rare expression that transformed his usually stern face. "Rodriguez is good at his job, but this setup is yours. Take credit for your work, Sarah. You've earned it." They stood there in the fading light, and Sarah became acutely aware of how alone they were. The support team had already packed up and left. It was just the 2 of them in this empty industrial building, surrounded by equipment and shadows. The moment felt weighted with possibility, and Sarah didn't know what to do with it. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I should head back. Early morning tomorrow. You planning to stay on site tonight or drive back?" "Drive back," Sarah answered. "I'll be here before dawn to power everything up and run system checks." "Want an escort to your car? This area isn't exactly dangerous, but it's pretty isolated." Sarah accepted, and they walked together through the darkening facility toward the parking area. Their conversation was light, carefully neutral, both of them seeming to sense the need to keep things professional. When they reached Sarah's car, Jake waited until she was safely inside before heading to his own vehicle. That night, Sarah found it difficult to sleep. She kept reviewing the drill parameters in her mind, double-checking that she hadn't missed anything critical. But underneath the professional anxiety was something else, a different kind of nervous energy that had everything to do with Jake Brennan and nothing to do with equipment testing. She firmly told herself to focus on work and eventually drifted into restless sleep. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. Sarah forced herself out of bed, took a quick shower, and grabbed the travel mug of coffee she had prepared the night before. The drive to the facility was surreal in the pre-dawn darkness, her headlights cutting through fog that had rolled in overnight. She felt like she was driving to some clandestine meeting rather than a routine training exercise. Sarah reached the facility at 5:15 and immediately began powering up her systems. Everything initialized correctly, and she ran through her checklist methodically. By 5:45, she was confident all equipment was functioning properly. The participants would begin arriving at 6:30, with the drill scheduled to commence at 7. Jake arrived at 6 on the dot, which didn't surprise Sarah at all. He struck her as someone who was always early, always prepared. He was dressed in full tactical gear, ready to participate directly in the drill rather than just observe. Following him were 2 vans carrying the candidate group and several other instructors who would be playing various roles in the exercise. The briefing took place in one of the cleared ground floor spaces. Jake laid out the scenario with characteristic precision. The candidates would be operating as a team tasked with securing the facility, gathering intelligence, and extracting a high-value target. They would face opposition from instructors playing enemy combatants, navigate communications dead zones, and solve tactical problems in real time. The whole exercise would take approximately 4 hours. Sarah listened from her monitoring position, watching through cameras and checking that all helmet-mounted systems were online. She could hear communications traffic as the teams ran their final equipment checks. The audio quality was excellent, which boded well for the exercise. These helmet systems represented cutting-edge technology, And if they performed as expected in this challenging environment, it would be a significant validation. The drill began precisely at 7. Sarah watched her monitors intensely as the first team entered Building 1. Their communication was crisp and professional, exactly what the training was designed to develop. They cleared rooms methodically, announced threats, and coordinated their movements with practiced efficiency. Jake's voice occasionally came over the command channel, offering guidance to the other instructors who were serving as opposition. 30 minutes into the exercise, the first communications challenge hit. Sarah watched her signal strength indicators drop as the team moved into a heavily reinforced section of Building 2. This was exactly the kind of dead zone Jake had mentioned, where concrete walls and metal infrastructure created signal interference. The helmet systems compensated automatically, boosting power and switching frequencies to maintain connection. It was working perfectly. Sarah made detailed notes, documenting how the systems handled the degraded conditions. This was real-world testing at its finest, the kind of data that couldn't be replicated in a laboratory. She felt a surge of professional satisfaction watching her equipment perform exactly as designed. The scenario grew more complex as teams encountered opposition, navigated through multi-story buildings, and communicated across expanding distances. Sarah's monitoring equipment captured it all, building a comprehensive picture of system performance under operational conditions. This was the kind of evaluation that would make her reputation in the defense contracting world. Around the 2-hour mark, Sarah noticed Jake's team moving toward Building 3, the most structurally complex part of the facility. This building had been part of the original manufacturing operation and featured heavy machinery, metal catwalks, and tight spaces that would test both the operators and their equipment. Sarah adjusted her camera angles to maintain visual coverage. Jake was leading his team personally, demonstrating tactical movement through the challenging environment. Even on camera, his expertise was evident. He moved efficiently, using cover effectively, and maintained constant awareness of his team's positioning. The candidates following him were learning from direct observation, seeing how experience translated into smooth execution. Then, Sarah's equipment registered something unusual. One of the helmet systems was showing intermittent signal degradation beyond what the environment should cause. She leaned closer to her monitor, trying to determine if this was a genuine malfunction or just an anomaly. The signal strength fluctuated, stabilized, then dropped again. This wasn't normal. Sarah keyed her radio to the command frequency. "Command, this is Monitor Station. I'm seeing unusual signal behavior from Helmet Unit 7. Recommend status check." Jake's voice came back immediately. "Monitor Station, copy. Stand by." A pause. Then, Unit 7, confirm your comms status. The response came through clearly. "Command, Unit 7. No issues observed. Audio and reception both clear." Sarah frowned at her monitors. The technical readings definitely showed a problem, but the user wasn't experiencing any degradation. This was concerning. It suggested either her monitoring equipment was malfunctioning or there was a subtle issue with the helmet system that hadn't manifested as obvious failure yet. "Command, Monitor Station. User reports clear, but my diagnostics are still showing anomalies. Request continued observation of Unit 7. Copy, Monitor Station. We'll track." Jake's tone had shifted slightly, becoming more focused. He understood the implications. Equipment that was failing in subtle ways could fail catastrophically at the worst possible moment. In training, that meant inconvenience. In actual operations, it could mean lives. Sarah kept close watch on Unit 7's readings while continuing to monitor the overall exercise. The signal issues persisted, following a pattern she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't random interference. There was something systematic about it, which meant either a design flaw or a specific environmental factor they hadn't accounted for. The exercise continued for another hour. Jake's team successfully completed their primary objectives and was working on the final phase, extraction of the simulated high-value target. Sarah had mostly forgotten about the signal anomaly. Assuming it was a minor issue, she could investigate in post-exercise analysis. That assumption proved dangerously wrong. The final extraction scenario required all teams to converge on Building 3's top floor. This was the climactic moment of the exercise, where everything came together and The training reached its peak intensity. Sarah watched multiple camera angles as teams moved into position, coordinating their approach and preparing for the final push. Jake was positioned on a metal catwalk on the fourth floor, overseeing the scenario and ready to intervene if any safety issues arose. Several candidates were moving below him, working through the tactical problem Jake had designed. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally when Sarah's equipment suddenly screamed a warning. Unit 7's signal had spiked and then dropped to near zero. The helmet system wasn't just degrading anymore, it was failing. Sarah's heart jumped as she realized Unit 7 was being worn by a candidate named Thompson, who was currently climbing a vertical ladder to reach the catwalk level where Jake was positioned. Command, Monitor Station. Unit 7 showing critical failure. Helmet system compromised. Sarah's voice was urgent, professional training overriding her spike of panic. She watched her screen as Jake immediately moved toward Thompson's position. But the angles were wrong, the spaces were tight, and everything was happening too fast. Thompson reached the catwalk, not knowing his helmet system was malfunctioning. The scenario called for a simulated engagement at this level, with Thompson and another candidate taking positions to provide covering fire. What happened next occurred in the space of seconds, but felt like minutes to Sarah. Thompson moved along the catwalk, the metal structure swaying slightly under his weight. Another candidate, Jenkins, was coming from the opposite direction for the pincer movement the scenario required. They needed to pass each other on the narrow catwalk, a simple maneuver both had performed dozens of times in training. But Thompson's helmet, compromised by the system failure, had shifted slightly on his head. The mounting system, which Sarah's diagnostics had been warning about, had loosened. As Thompson turned to coordinate with Jenkins, another candidate below accidentally knocked into the catwalk support, sending a vibration through the metal structure. Thompson stumbled slightly, nothing serious under normal circumstances. But the compromised helmet shifted again, now significantly out of position. Thompson reached up reflexively to adjust it, taking one hand off the catwalk railing. At that exact moment, Jenkins passed him, the tight space requiring them to move carefully. Sarah watched in horror as Thompson's helmet was knocked completely askew by accidental contact with Jenkins' equipment. The helmet rotated on Thompson's head, blocking his vision just as he tried to regain his two-handed grip on the railing. He missed the grab, his balance already compromised, and, suddenly, Thompson was falling backward off the catwalk. Time seemed to fracture. Sarah was screaming into her radio. Jake was already moving with incredible speed, and Thompson was tumbling through the air toward the concrete floor 20 feet below. The safety protocols required all personnel to wear harnesses during high-work operations, but this catwalk had been rated as low risk, requiring only handrails. There was nothing to catch Thompson. Jake moved faster than Sarah would have thought humanly possible. He launched himself along the catwalk, reaching the edge just as Thompson fell past it. Jake's hand shot out, catching Thompson by the tactical vest strap, arresting the fall with brutal suddenness. Thompson's full weight jerked against Jake's grip, and even on camera Sarah could see the strain on Jake's arm and shoulder as he held on. For a heartbeat, everything hung in balance. Jake was stretched across the catwalk railing, one hand locked on the metal, the other gripping Thompson's vest, his core strength the only thing preventing a potentially fatal fall. Thompson dangled in space, his compromised helmet finally falling free and clattering to the concrete below. Then, Jake was hauling Thompson up with pure strength, muscles straining as he pulled the younger man back to safety. Other candidates and instructors rushed to help, hands reaching to grab Thompson and pull him onto the catwalk. Within seconds, Thompson was secure, breathing hard but uninjured. The entire facility went silent. The exercise had stopped instantly, everyone processing what had just happened. Over the radio, Sarah heard Jake's voice, steady despite what had just occurred. All teams, exercise terminated. Everyone hold positions. Medical sound off. The corpsman immediately responded, confirming he was moving to Thompson's location for evaluation. Jake continued, his command presence never wavering. This is a safety stand-down. Everyone maintains current positions until I get accountability. Sarah sat frozen at her monitoring station, her hands shaking as the adrenaline hit her system. She had just watched a man nearly die, saved only by Jake's incredible reflexes and strength. And the failure had originated from equipment she was supposed to be monitoring. The helmet system had malfunctioned, and she had seen the warning signs but hadn't understood them quickly enough to prevent the incident. Jake's voice came over her direct channel. "Monitor station, I need you to secure all equipment data immediately. Nothing gets erased or modified. Everything from the last 3 hours needs to be preserved exactly as recorded." "Copy, command," Sarah managed, her voice tight. "Beginning data lockdown now." Her fingers moved over her keyboard, implementing the protocols for preserving evidence after a safety incident. Every sensor reading, every camera angle, every communication log was being saved to multiple redundant systems. The next hour was a blur of activity. Thompson was evaluated by medical personnel and determined to be shaken but physically unharmed. The exercise was officially terminated, and all participants were assembled for an immediate debrief. Safety officers arrived to document the incident and begin their investigation. Sarah remained at her monitoring station, providing data as requested and answering preliminary questions about what her equipment had recorded. Finally, Jake appeared at her station. He had removed his tactical gear and looked exhausted, the adrenaline crash clearly hitting him. He also looked angry, though Sarah couldn't tell if it was directed at the situation, at her, or at himself. "Walk me through everything your equipment recorded about Unit 7, he said without preamble. His voice was flat, professional, carefully controlled. Sarah pulled up the data streams, showing him the signal degradation pattern that had started subtle and escalated to catastrophic failure. She explained her warning to command, the timing of her alerts, and her assessment that the helmet mounting system had been the primary failure point. Jake listened intently, asking technical questions and making notes. When she finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, he said, "This wasn't your fault." Sarah had been holding herself together through sheer willpower, but those words cracked something inside her. "I saw the warnings. I should have pushed harder, should have demanded immediate halt to." "You followed correct protocol," Jake interrupted. "You reported the anomaly, I acknowledged it, and we both made the judgment that continued observation was appropriate. The system was showing degradation, not imminent failure. There was no indication this would happen." He paused, then added more gently, "Sarah, you did everything right. The equipment failed. That's why we test it. Better to find this here than in actual operations." Thompson could have died. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "But he didn't. Because we have multiple safety layers, trained personnel, and procedures designed for exactly this kind of situation." Jake's expression softened slightly. "I know you're shaken. Hell, I'm shaken. But this is part of why we train the way we do. Things go wrong. Equipment fails. People make mistakes. Our job is to be ready for that and handle it when it happens." The investigation consumed the next 2 weeks of Sarah's life. She was interviewed multiple times by safety officers, technical experts from the equipment manufacturer, and Navy command personnel. Each interview required her to walk through the data, explain her monitoring protocols, and defend her decisions. It was exhausting and stressful, but Sarah approached it with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. The investigation team set up a temporary office in one of the base administrative buildings, and Sarah spent hours there providing technical analysis. The lead investigator was a Navy commander named Patterson, a former SEAL officer who now specialized in equipment safety reviews. He was methodical, patient, and insisted on understanding every detail, no matter how minor it seemed. Sarah learned that Thompson was recovering well and had actually requested to continue training once he was cleared. That information provided some relief, though it didn't eliminate the guilt Sarah felt. She had been responsible for monitoring the equipment, and equipment failure on her watch felt like personal failure regardless of what Jake or anyone else said. The manufacturer sent their own engineering team to analyze the failed helmet. They worked closely with Sarah, comparing her field data with their laboratory findings. What emerged was a picture of a subtle design flaw that only manifested under specific conditions. The mounting system, while generally robust, could loosen when subjected to particular patterns of vibration and stress. The industrial facility's metal structures had created a resonance frequency that, combined with Thompson's specific movement patterns, had gradually compromised the helmet's secure fit. It was a perfect storm of small factors, each individually harmless, but collectively dangerous. The manufacturer was devastated, immediately issuing a recall of the entire helmet line and beginning redesign work. Sarah's detailed monitoring data became the foundation for understanding the problem and developing solutions. Her thoroughness, which she had worried wasn't enough, turned out to be exactly what was needed. Commander Hayes called Sarah into her office during the second week of investigation. Sarah expected more questions, more reviews of her procedures. Instead, the commander offered her a seat and said, "I've been reading the investigation reports. Your work throughout this incident has been exemplary. The data you collected, the early warnings you provided, and your cooperation with the investigation have all exceeded expectations." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She had been expecting criticism, not praise. "Thank you, ma'am. But I feel like I should have done more to prevent." "Stop," Commander Hayes interrupted. "I know you've been beating yourself up about this. I can see it. But you need to understand something. Equipment testing exists precisely because equipment fails. If everything always worked perfectly, we wouldn't need people like you. Your job is to find failures before they happen in actual operations." That's exactly what occurred here. Thompson nearly died. In training, under controlled conditions, with safety personnel present. Yes, it was close. Yes, it was frightening. But contrast that with what would have happened if this helmet had failed during actual combat operations. An operator falling from a building in hostile territory, no safety net, no immediate medical support. That's the nightmare scenario your work prevented. The commander's words were meant to be reassuring, but Sarah struggled to accept them. She understood the logic intellectually, but emotionally she remained shaken by how close the incident had come to tragedy. Commander Hayes seemed to sense Sarah's ongoing distress. Her voice softened slightly. "Mitchell, I've worked with a lot of contractors over the years. Most do adequate work, collect their data, write their reports, and never truly engage with the reality of what we do here. You're different. You care about the people using this equipment. That's good. It makes you better at your job. But you can't let that care paralyze you or make you afraid to continue doing this work." "I'm not afraid," Sarah said automatically, then paused to consider if that was actually true. "Or maybe I am, a little. I keep replaying the moment, wondering what I could have done differently. That's normal. Healthy, even, as long as you don't get stuck there. Learn from it, adjust your protocols if needed, and move forward. The investigation will be complete soon, and you'll be back to regular duties. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I am." The investigation concluded 3 days later. The official report found no fault with Sarah's monitoring or with Jake's conduct during the exercise. The helmet manufacturer accepted full responsibility for the design flaw, and new safety protocols were implemented for all equipment testing going forward. Thompson was cleared to return to full training and went on record saying he bore no ill will toward anyone involved in the incident. Life on the base gradually returned to normal, though Sarah found that her perspective had fundamentally shifted. She was more cautious in her evaluations, more insistent on comprehensive testing before clearing equipment for use. The other contractors noticed the change, commenting that Sarah had become even more thorough than before, which was saying something. Her relationship with Jake had also changed, though in ways Sarah couldn't quite define. They still worked together professionally, still planned and executed equipment evaluations. But there was an added layer of understanding between them now, a shared experience of crisis and consequence that bonded them in subtle ways. Jake seemed more protective of her, checking in more frequently, and showing concern for her well-being beyond just professional courtesy. About 3 weeks after the incident, Jake asked Sarah to meet him after hours at a small coffee shop off base. It was an unusual request, but Sarah agreed without hesitation. She arrived to find Jake already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He looked tired, older somehow, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. "Thanks for coming," Jake said as Sarah sat down. He pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. "Black coffee, 2 sugars. I hope I got that right." Sarah was surprised he had noticed how she took her coffee. "That's perfect, thank you. What's this about?" Jake was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. I wanted to talk to you away from the base, away from all the official channels and command structure. Just two people who went through something difficult together. Sarah nodded, waiting for him to continue. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, Jake began. About how close we came to losing Thompson, about the split-second decisions, and pure luck that kept him alive. I've been in combat. I've seen men die, and I've had plenty of close calls myself. But this felt different somehow. Maybe because it was training, supposed to be controlled. Maybe because I saw it coming and barely got there in time. You saved his life, Sarah said quietly. Your reflexes, your strength, you're the only reason he's okay. This time, Jake replied. But what about next time? What about the things I don't see coming? The equipment failures I don't catch? The mistakes that slip through despite all our training and protocols? He looked directly at her. You were monitoring everything. You gave early warning, and it still almost wasn't enough. That's been haunting me. Sarah understood exactly what he meant because she had been wrestling with the same thoughts. We can't control everything. We do our best. We build in safety margins. We train for contingencies. But there's always risk. That's inherent to what you do, what they train for. I know that intellectually, Jake said. Hell, I've accepted that reality for my entire adult life. But having it proven so dramatically, with equipment failure being the cause rather than enemy action or environmental factors, it's made me question things. Made me wonder if we're testing rigorously enough, pushing hard enough to find these flaws before they matter. The investigation cleared all our procedures. Official procedures, sure. But you and I both know we could be doing more. Additional testing protocols, more comprehensive monitoring, longer evaluation periods before equipment is approved for operational use. Jake leaned forward slightly. I've been talking with Commander Hayes and some of the other senior staff. We want to overhaul the entire equipment evaluation process. Make it more thorough, more demanding. And we want you to lead that effort. Sarah's eyes widened. Me? Lead the overhaul? Jake, I'm just a contractor. I'm not even military. That's exactly why you're perfect for it. You're not embedded in the existing culture. You're not invested in defending how things have always been done. You're an engineer who cares about the people using the equipment and who has proven she'll dig deep to find problems. That's what we need. This is a huge responsibility, Sarah said, her mind already racing with the implications. I need to coordinate with multiple departments, probably step on some toes, challenge established procedures. That's going to make me unpopular. Jake smiled grimly. Welcome to leadership. Making the right call often means making the unpopular call. But you're strong enough to handle it. I've watched you work for 3 months now. You don't back down when you know you're right. And you don't let intimidation or politics compromise your standards. That's rare, Sarah. That's valuable. They talked for another hour, discussing the scope of the project and what it would entail. Jake laid out a vision for comprehensive equipment testing that would set new standards for the entire special operations community. Sarah found herself getting excited despite her nervousness about the expanded role. This was an opportunity to make a real difference, to ensure that what happened with Thompson never happened again. As they were preparing to leave, Jake said, "There's something else I wanted to tell you. Something personal rather than professional." Sarah's heart rate picked up slightly. Okay. Watching that incident unfold, seeing Thompson fall, and not knowing if I'd reach him in time, it crystallized something for me. Life is short and uncertain, especially in this line of work. We don't get unlimited time to figure things out or wait for perfect moments. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've enjoyed working with you. More than enjoyed it, actually. You're brilliant, dedicated, and you challenge me to be better at what I do. I'd like to spend more time with you outside of work, if you're interested. Dinner, maybe, or whatever you'd be comfortable with. Sarah felt a rush of emotions, surprise and pleasure and anxiety all mixing together. She had sensed the growing connection between them, but hadn't expected Jake to address it so directly. I'm interested, she heard herself say. But this is complicated. You're senior military personnel. I'm a contractor. There are professional boundaries and power dynamics to consider. All true, Jake acknowledged. Which is why I wanted to be completely transparent about it rather than letting things develop ambiguously. I'm not your direct supervisor. There's no evaluation authority or career influence I have over you. But you're right that it's complicated. I'm not going to pressure you or make things awkward if you'd rather keep things purely professional. I just wanted you to know I'm interested, so you could make an informed decision. Sarah appreciated his directness more than she could express. This was exactly the kind of honest communication that was rare in complicated situations. Can I think about it? Not because I'm not interested, but because I want to make sure I'm thinking clearly and not just responding emotionally after everything that's happened. Of course, take all the time you need. And, regardless of your decision, it won't affect our working relationship. I'm professional enough to handle that, I promise. They parted ways in the parking lot, and Sarah drove home with her mind spinning. Jake Brennan, legendary SEAL instructor, had just asked her out, and she wanted to say yes, but she needed to be smart about this. Her career was important, her reputation mattered, and getting involved with someone in his position could complicate everything. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into planning the equipment evaluation overhaul. She drafted proposal documents, scheduled meetings with department heads, and began building a framework for more rigorous testing protocols. The work was consuming and challenging, which was exactly what she needed. It helped her process her feelings about Jake, while also proving to herself that she could handle the leadership role he had recommended her for. Commander Hayes officially approved the project on a Friday afternoon, giving Sarah expanded authority and a larger budget to implement the new testing regime. The commander also noted that Master Chief Brennan had been particularly vocal in advocating for Sarah to lead the effort, which Sarah filed away as another piece of evidence regarding his feelings. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with a glass of wine and really thought about what she wanted. Jake was older, experienced, and lived in a world of danger and uncertainty. Getting involved with him meant accepting all of that, accepting that his job would always come first, and that the risks he took were part of who he was. It also meant navigating complex professional relationships and probably dealing with gossip and judgment from others on the base. But he was also intelligent, honorable, and had shown her nothing but respect and support. He challenged her, believed in her capabilities, and had proven his character in crisis. The connection between them was real, not just professional admiration but genuine attraction and compatibility. Sarah realized she would regret it if she let fear of complications prevent her from exploring what might develop between them. She sent Jake a text message. "I've thought about your offer. Dinner sounds good. When are you free?" His response came back within minutes. "Tomorrow night? I know a place." Sarah smiled at her phone, feeling nervous and excited and slightly terrified. "Tomorrow works. Pick me up at 7. It's a date." And just like that, everything changed again. Sarah went to bed that night knowing that she was entering new territory, both professionally and personally. The equipment evaluation overhaul would test her leadership and technical skills. The relationship with Jake would test her heart and her courage. She was ready for both challenges, or at least as ready as anyone could be when stepping into the unknown. The next evening, Sarah spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. She wanted to look nice, but not like she was trying too hard. Eventually, she settled on dark jeans, an emerald green blouse that brought out her eyes, and minimal jewelry. When Jake knocked on her door at exactly 7, she was as prepared as she was going to be. He had also clearly put thought into his appearance. He wore dark slacks and a button-down shirt, no tie, looking polished but relaxed. His hair was still military short but neatly styled, and he had shaved recently. He smiled when she opened the door, and Sarah felt her nervousness ease slightly. "You look beautiful," Jake said simply. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sarah replied, grabbing her jacket. "So where are we going?" "Place up the coast. Best seafood in the area, and it's quiet enough that we can actually talk. I made reservations." The drive took about 40 minutes, following the coastline north. They talked easily about work, about Sarah's plans for the evaluation overhaul, about Jake's upcoming training schedules. It was comfortable, natural, building on the rapport they had already established through months of professional interaction. The restaurant was exactly as Jake had described, a small family-run place with amazing food and a peaceful atmosphere. They were seated at a table by the window with an ocean view, and Sarah felt herself relaxing into the evening. This was nice. More than nice, it was exactly what she needed. Over dinner, their conversation deepened. Jake talked about his years in the Navy, the experiences that had shaped him, the losses he had endured, and the victories he had earned. He was honest about the toll the lifestyle had taken, the failed marriage, the injuries both physical and psychological. But he also spoke with pride about the work he did, the operators he trained, and the knowledge that his efforts kept people alive in dangerous places. Sarah shared her own story, her journey from rural Montana to defense contracting, the passion for engineering that drove her work. She talked about her parents, her childhood on the farm, and the moment she had decided that she wanted to work on technology that mattered, that saved lives rather than just generated profits. You know what strikes me? Jake said as they finished dinner. We're both drawn to the same thing, just from different angles. You want to build and test equipment that keeps people safe. I want to train operators who can handle anything thrown at them. Same goal, different methods. I hadn't thought of it that way. The following months transformed Sarah's life in ways she had never anticipated. The equipment evaluation overhaul project consumed most of her working hours, requiring her to coordinate with dozens of stakeholders, negotiate with manufacturers, and completely redesign testing protocols. It was the most challenging professional work she had ever undertaken, and she threw herself into it with single-minded determination. The new protocols Sarah developed were comprehensive and demanding. Every piece of equipment would undergo 3 phases of testing: controlled laboratory conditions, realistic training scenarios, and extended field trials. Each phase required detailed documentation, multiple evaluation cycles, and approval from both technical experts and end users. The operators themselves would have significant input into equipment selection, something that hadn't been standard practice before. Not everyone appreciated the changes. Some manufacturers complained about the increased testing requirements and longer approval timelines. Some military personnel felt the new protocols were unnecessarily complicated compared to existing procedures. Sarah faced resistance and criticism from multiple directions, but she held firm. The memory of Thompson falling, of coming so close to tragedy because of overlooked equipment flaws, gave her the resolve to push through opposition. Jake was her strongest supporter throughout the process. He advocated for the new protocols in command meetings, helped Sarah navigate military bureaucracy, and provided practical feedback on testing scenarios. Their professional relationship remained solid even as their personal relationship deepened. They were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries at work, but everyone on base knew they were seeing each other. The gossip had been inevitable, but it died down when people realized the relationship wasn't affecting either of their professional performance. They had settled into a comfortable pattern. Dinners a couple times a week, occasional weekend trips up the coast, quiet evenings at Sarah's apartment talking and relaxing. Jake's life was still dominated by his work, with unpredictable hours and sudden schedule changes. But Sarah understood and accepted that. She had her own demanding career, and they both appreciated that neither expected the other to sacrifice professional commitments. About 4 months into their relationship, Jake's demeanor started to change. He became more withdrawn, distracted during their time together. Sarah noticed, but didn't push, figuring he would talk when he was ready. Military life involved classified operations and information she wasn't cleared for. She had learned to accept that there would be parts of his work she couldn't know about. Finally, one evening in late November, Jake told her what was weighing on him. They were at his place, a modest apartment near the base that was decorated with all the personality of a hotel room. Jake had never been one for personal touches, and it showed in his living space. "I got orders," he said without preamble. "Deployment. Leaving in 3 weeks." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had known this was possible, even likely, but hearing it stated so directly made it real. "Where? How long?" "Can't tell you where. Probably 4 to 6 months, possibly longer depending on how things develop." Jake looked at her seriously. "This is part of what I do, Sarah. It's not the training and teaching side, it's the operational side. I've been expecting recall to active duty for a while now. My particular skill set is needed for some specialized operations." "Is it dangerous?" Sarah immediately regretted the question. Of course it was dangerous. That was the nature of special operations. More dangerous than training? Yes. But I'm good at what I do. I work with the best people in the world, and we prepare for everything. I'm not going to lie and say there's no risk, but I'm as safe as anyone can be in this line of work." Sarah nodded, processing the information. 4 to 6 months. Half a year of not seeing him, limited communication, constant worry about whether he was safe. And this was just the first deployment. There would be others, over and over, for as long as Jake remained in the Navy. "I understand if this changes things," Jake said carefully. "I know what I'm asking isn't fair. Most people can't handle the uncertainty and the separation. My ex-wife couldn't, and I don't blame her. If you want to step back from this relationship, I'll understand." Sarah looked at him, this strong, capable man who had somehow become so important to her. She thought about the past months, how much she had grown both professionally and personally. She thought about Thompson's fall and Jake's lightning reflexes, about trust and courage and commitment. "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly. "This is part of who you are, part of what you do. I knew that going in. I won't pretend it doesn't scare me. But I'm not walking away because things get difficult. That's not how I'm built." Relief washed over Jake's face. He pulled her close, holding her tightly. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "I know I'm asking a lot." "We'll figure it out," Sarah replied, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The next 3 weeks passed too quickly. Jake was consumed with pre-deployment preparations, briefings, training refreshers, and administrative tasks. Sarah continued her work on the equipment evaluation project while also trying to spend as much time with Jake as possible. They made the most of every moment, creating memories to sustain them through the coming separation. The evaluation project reached a significant milestone during that time. The first pieces of equipment tested under the new protocols were approved for operational use, and the feedback from the operators was overwhelmingly positive. Commander Hayes called Sarah into her office to personally commend her work and inform her that the new testing regime was being adopted as standard practice across multiple Navy commands. "You've done something remarkable here, Mitchell," Commander Hayes said. "You've changed the culture of how we evaluate equipment, made it more rigorous and more operator-focused. That's going to save lives, no question. I'm recommending you for a commendation from the Secretary of the Navy." Sarah was stunned. A civilian commendation from that level was extremely rare. "I don't know what to say, ma'am. Thank you. You earned it. And I want you to know that when your current contract expires in 6 months, we're prepared to offer you a permanent position as the Senior Equipment Evaluation Specialist. More responsibility, better compensation, and direct authority over the testing program. Think about it." Sarah left the meeting feeling a complex mix of pride and anxiety. Her career was taking off exactly as she had hoped. But Jake was leaving in days, heading into danger she couldn't share or fully understand. Success and loss, triumph and fear, all wrapped together in a way that made her head spin. Jake's deployment day arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Sarah had taken the day off work to drive him to the base for his departure. They didn't talk much during the drive, both lost in their own thoughts. At the base gate, Jake squeezed her hand and said, "I'll contact you when I can. It won't be often, and it'll be brief, but I'll let you know I'm okay." "Stay safe," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion she was trying to control. "Come back to me." "That's the plan," Jake replied, attempting lightness but not quite achieving it. He kissed her one more time, long and deep, and then he was gone, walking toward the building where his team was assembling. Sarah watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then drove home trying not to cry. The first month was the hardest. Sarah threw herself into work, often staying late at the office to avoid her empty apartment. She accepted Commander Hayes's offer of the permanent position, negotiating terms, and signing contracts that cemented her future with the Navy's equipment evaluation program. The work was fulfilling, but it couldn't quite fill the space Jake's absence had created. Communication was exactly as sparse as he had warned. She received 3 brief emails that month, each just a few sentences saying he was fine and couldn't provide details. Sarah wrote longer messages back, telling him about work developments and mundane daily activities, trying to maintain connection even though she had no idea when or if he would read them. Her parents noticed the change when she called home for Thanksgiving. Her mother asked if she was seeing anyone, and Sarah found herself explaining about Jake and the deployment. Her father, who had served in the Army decades ago, understood immediately. He told Sarah that what she was doing, supporting someone in special operations, was its own kind of service. That perspective helped, making Sarah feel less like she was just passively waiting and more like she was actively contributing in her own way. The equipment evaluation program continued expanding. Sarah hired 2 additional contractors to help manage the increased workload, training them in the protocols she had developed. She also began giving presentations at military conferences, sharing the new testing methodology, and encouraging other commands to adopt similar approaches. Her reputation in defense contracting circles grew rapidly, and she received job offers from several major corporations. She turned them all down, committed to the work she was doing with the Navy. Christmas came and went. Sarah spent it with her parents in Montana, grateful for the distraction of family and familiar surroundings. Her mother fussed over her, clearly worried about Sarah's emotional state. Her father talked to her seriously about the realities of loving someone in the military, offering hard-won wisdom from his own marriage during his service years. Their support meant everything, even though it couldn't make the situation easier. In January, Sarah received a longer email from Jake. He still couldn't provide operational details, but he wrote about missing her, about looking forward to coming home, about plans he had for when he returned. The message made Sarah cry, but they were good tears, tears of relief and love rather than fear. She wrote back immediately, pouring out everything she had been holding inside. The waiting became slightly more bearable as she adjusted to it. Sarah established routines, stayed busy, and built a support network of other Navy spouses and partners who understood what she was going through. She learned to manage the anxiety, to function despite the uncertainty, to find meaning in her work while part of her heart was deployed somewhere she couldn't name. In late February, Commander Hayes called Sarah into her office with unusual urgency. Sarah's first thought was that something had happened to Jake, and her heart stopped. But the commander's first words were reassuring. "Brennan is fine, as far as I know. But I need to talk to you about something related to his deployment." Sarah sat down, still anxious but no longer terrified. "What is it, ma'am?" Brennan's team encountered equipment issues in the field. Body armor failure under specific conditions they encountered in their operational environment. It's not life-threatening yet, but it's serious enough that they've requested emergency evaluation and replacement of the gear. The manufacturer is scrambling to respond, but there are questions about what actually went wrong and whether the proposed replacements will perform any better. Sarah's professional instincts kicked in immediately. Do we have specifics on the failure mode? Environmental conditions? What kind of stress testing has the replacement gear undergone? That's why I'm talking to you. The command wants our best equipment evaluation specialist to analyze this situation and make recommendations. That's you. But it's complicated because your personal relationship with Brennan creates potential conflict of interest concerns. I need to know if you can handle this professionally despite the personal stakes. Sarah didn't hesitate. I can handle it. If Jake and his team need better equipment, my personal feelings are irrelevant. I'll evaluate based on data and engineering principles, nothing else. That's my job. Commander Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. I thought that would be your answer. Okay, your lead on this. I'm sending you all the classified briefing materials. You'll have 72 hours to provide preliminary analysis and recommendations. The next 3 days were intense. Sarah analyzed failure reports, reviewed environmental data, studied the replacement equipment specifications, and ran her own comparative tests on similar gear. She consulted with materials engineers, ballistics experts, and operators with field experience. She barely slept, driven by the knowledge that her analysis would directly impact Jake's safety and that of his entire team. Her conclusion was both relieving and concerning. The original body armor had failed due to a combination of extreme temperature fluctuations and a specific chemical exposure that degraded the protective material. The manufacturer's proposed replacement used similar materials and would likely fail under the same conditions. However, an alternative system from a different manufacturer, which had performed exceptionally well in Sarah's recent testing protocols, would be ideal for the environment Jake's team was operating in. Sarah's recommendation to use the alternative system rather than the manufacturer's replacement was controversial. It meant breaking an existing contract, spending more money, and admitting that the original procurement decision had been flawed. But Sarah stood by her analysis, providing detailed technical justification and offering to stake her professional reputation on the recommendation. Commander Hayes forwarded Sarah's report up the chain of command with a strong endorsement. Within 24 hours, the decision came back. Implement Sarah's recommendation immediately. The alternative body armor would be expedited to Jake's team, replacing the compromised equipment. Multiple operators, including Jake, would have better protection because Sarah had done her job with absolute integrity despite her personal connection to the situation. Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with relief. This was why she did this work. This was what mattered. Equipment that worked properly, operators who came home alive, her skills and knowledge making a real difference. The fact that one of those operators was someone she loved just made it more personal, but it hadn't compromised her professional judgment. A week later, Sarah received another brief email from Jake. New gear arrived. Much better. Thank you for taking care of us. Miss you. Coming home soon. Those words sustained Sarah through the final weeks of waiting. Spring arrived, bringing longer days and warming weather. Sarah's work continued thriving, with the equipment evaluation program now considered a model for other military branches to emulate. She received the commendation from the Secretary of the Navy in a small ceremony that Commander Hayes insisted on, though Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention. And then, finally, on a Tuesday morning in early April, Sarah received the call she had been waiting for and a half months for. Jake was back. His team had returned to base the previous night, and after debriefing and medical checks, he would be released that evening. He wanted to see her. Sarah left work early, something she rarely did, and went home to prepare. She cleaned her already clean apartment, changed clothes 3 times, and tried to calm her nerves. When Jake knocked on her door at 6:30 that evening, Sarah flung it open and threw herself into his arms. He looked older, thinner, with new lines around his eyes and a deeper weariness in his expression. But he was alive, he was whole, and he was home. They held each other for a long moment without speaking, communicating everything that needed to be said through touch alone. I missed you, Jake finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I missed you too, Sarah replied. Every single day. They spent the evening talking, really talking, for hours. Jake told her what he could about the deployment, the challenges they had faced, the victories they had achieved. He talked about the moment he received the new body armor, how he had immediately known Sarah was behind the change because it bore all the hallmarks of her thorough evaluation process. He described how that equipment had performed flawlessly in conditions that would have compromised the original gear, potentially saving lives in several engagements. Sarah shared her own experiences of the past months, the work achievements and personal struggles, the loneliness, and the way she had coped. They talked about the future, about what they wanted from this relationship, and whether they could make it work given the realities of Jake's career. I have maybe 5 more years before I age out of active operations, Jake said. After that, I'll transition to full-time training and instruction. No more deployments, much more stable schedule. I know that's asking you to wait and endure uncertainty for a long time, but there is an end point to the deployments. Sarah considered this. 5 years. It felt like forever and no time at all. But she also realized something important during Jake's deployment. She loved him, truly loved him, in a way that made the waiting and worrying worthwhile. She didn't want to imagine her life without him in it. I can handle 5 years, Sarah said. As long as you keep coming home to me. That's the plan, Jake replied, echoing the words he had said before deploying. But this time they both understood how fragile plans could be, how quickly circumstances could change. They had both witnessed how close things could come to tragedy, both in training and in operations. That knowledge made their time together more precious, more intentional. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Jake was busy with debriefings and training schedule planning. Sarah continued expanding the equipment evaluation program while also serving as a technical advisor on multiple procurement decisions. They made time for each other despite demanding schedules, prioritizing their relationship in ways they hadn't before Jake's deployment. One evening in May, Jake suggested they drive up to the cliff overlook where they had gone on one of their early dates. Sarah agreed, enjoying the chance to revisit a place that held good memories. They arrived at sunset, watching the sky turn brilliant colors over the Pacific Ocean. "I've been thinking about that incident with Thompson," Jake said, breaking a comfortable silence. "About how close we came to losing him, about the equipment failure and your warnings and everything that happened that day." "We all think about it sometimes," Sarah replied. "It changed a lot of things." "It changed everything," Jake corrected. "It brought us together, it transformed how we test equipment, it made both of us better at what we do. Sometimes I wonder if things happen for a reason, if there's some larger purpose to the challenges we face." "I don't know about cosmic purpose," Sarah said thoughtfully. "But I do know we can choose what we learn from difficult experiences. We chose to improve systems, to build something better. That matters." Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Sarah's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. "Sarah Mitchell, you are the strongest, smartest, most capable woman I've ever known. You've proven you can handle the hardest parts of my life, and you make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. This was unexpected, overwhelming, and absolutely right. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed as the sun set behind them. It was a perfect moment, the kind that people remember for the rest of their lives. Sarah knew challenges lay ahead, more deployments and separations and uncertainties. But she also knew they would face those challenges together, supporting each other and building a life that honored both their commitments. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony on the beach, surrounded by close friends and family. Commander Hayes attended, along with many of the sailors and instructors Sarah and Jake had worked with. Thompson, fully recovered and thriving in his training, served as one of Jake's groomsmen. Sarah's parents flew out from Montana, and her father walked her down the aisle with quiet pride. The ceremony was simple and meaningful, focusing on the commitment they were making rather than elaborate details. When Jake placed the wedding band on Sarah's finger, his hands were steady and sure. When Sarah spoke her vows, promising to love and support him through everything their lives would bring, she meant every word with absolute conviction. The reception was held at the same restaurant where they had gone on their first date. People gave toasts, telling stories about Sarah's dedication to her work and Jake's legendary career. Commander Hayes spoke about how rarely she had seen two people who complemented each other so perfectly, who made each other stronger while maintaining their individual excellence. As the evening wound down, Sarah and Jake stood on the restaurant deck overlooking the ocean. The sound of waves provided a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "No regrets?" Jake asked, his arm around Sarah's waist. "None," Sarah replied firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even knowing what you're signing up for, the deployments, the uncertainty, the lifestyle, especially knowing all that. I'm not walking into this blindly. I know what I'm choosing, and I'm choosing you. All of you, including the complicated parts." Jake pulled her closer. "I'm the luckiest man alive." They remained on the deck long after their guests had left, talking about their plans for the future. Jake had 2 more years before his next expected deployment, time they would use to build their life together. Sarah's career continued ascending, with offers to consult for other military branches, and even some preliminary discussions about testifying before congressional committees about equipment procurement reform. Life settled into a new normal over the following year. Sarah and Jake bought a house together, a modest place near the base with enough room for Sarah's home office and Jake's collection of military memorabilia. They adopted a dog, a German Shepherd mix from a local rescue that Jake trained with impressive skill. Sarah's equipment evaluation program expanded to cover additional commands, and she hired a small team to help manage the workload. The helmet manufacturer that had produced the failed equipment during Thompson's incident completely redesigned their product line based on Sarah's findings. The new systems, tested exhaustively under Sarah's protocols, performed exceptionally well and became standard issue across multiple special operations units. Sarah took quiet satisfaction in knowing that her work from that difficult incident had resulted in better protection for countless operators. Thompson himself became one of Sarah's strongest advocates. He had completed his training, earned his trident, and was now serving as a SEAL operator. He credited Sarah's equipment evaluation work with keeping him and his teammates safe during their operations, and he made a point of thanking her whenever their paths crossed. Commander Hayes retired after 30 years of service, and her replacement, Commander Wilson, continued supporting Sarah's work with equal enthusiasm. The equipment evaluation program had proven its value repeatedly, catching design flaws and performance issues that previous testing methods had missed. Other military branches began adopting similar protocols, with Sarah frequently asked to consult on their implementation. Jake's second deployment came in their second year of marriage. This time, Sarah was better prepared emotionally, though the separation was no less difficult. They had established better communication plans, and Jake was able to contact her slightly more frequently than during his first deployment. Sarah maintained her focus on work, continued developing the equipment program, and counted down the days until Jake's return. When he came home 4 months later, they picked up exactly where they had left off. Their relationship had matured into something solid and enduring, built on mutual respect, shared values, and deep love. They had learned to navigate the challenges of military life together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating successes. Years passed. Jake eventually transitioned to full-time training and instruction, just as he had predicted. No more operational deployments, though his work remained demanding and important. Sarah's career reached levels she had never imagined, with her equipment evaluation methodology becoming the gold standard across the military. She published papers, gave keynote speeches at defense conferences, and trained the next generation of equipment specialists. They talked occasionally about that day when Thompson's helmet had been knocked off mid-drill, about the instant when Jake had ended the exercise, and everything had changed. It had been a pivotal moment for both of them, one that had tested them in ways neither had expected. But they had risen to meet those challenges, both individually and together. Sarah sometimes reflected on how a single incident, a moment of equipment failure and crisis response, had fundamentally altered the trajectory of her life. She had come to the naval base as a young contractor hoping to build a career. She had found that career, exceeded her own expectations, and transformed how the military evaluated the equipment that kept operators safe. But she had also found something more: purpose, partnership, and love that had proven strong enough to weather every storm. Jake would often say that catching Thompson during his fall had been the easy part. Building a life with Sarah, navigating the complexities of their careers and relationship, that had been the real challenge and the real triumph. They had succeeded because they had chosen each other completely, accepting both the joys and the difficulties that came with their paths. Standing in their backyard one evening, watching the California sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah thought about how far she had come from that nervous first day at the naval facility. She had grown from an uncertain young engineer into a confident leader whose work saved lives. She had found love with an extraordinary man who challenged and supported her in equal measure. She had built a career that mattered and a life that fulfilled her. The German shepherd, now gray around the muzzle, dozed at their feet. Jake's hand was warm in hers. The evening air was perfect. This was peace, hard-won and deeply valued. This was home. This was exactly where Sarah Mitchell Brennan was supposed to be, and she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new equipment to evaluate, new systems to test. There would be training exercises and safety reviews, and all the demanding work that defined their professional lives. But tonight, in this moment, there was simply gratitude for the path they had walked together and quiet confidence in the future they would continue building side by side. But you're right, Sarah agreed. Maybe that's why we work well together. We understand each other's motivations. They lingered over coffee and dessert, neither in a hurry for the evening to end. When Jake finally paid the check and they walked back to his truck, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. This had been perfect, exactly what a first date should be. Jake drove her home, and They sat in his truck outside her apartment for a few minutes, talking and laughing about a story he had told about a training mishap years ago. Finally, Sarah said, I should probably go inside. Early morning tomorrow, I have meetings about the new testing protocols. Of course, Jake said. He walked her to her door, and they stood there in the soft glow of the porch light. I had a great time tonight, Sarah. I'd like to do this again, if you're interested. I'm definitely interested, Sarah replied. She reached up and kissed him, a brief but meaningful connection that felt like a promise of things to come. When she pulled back, Jake was smiling. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Jake studied her for a moment, clearly debating something. Then, he said, the investigation team will need your full cooperation. Give them everything, answer all their questions honestly. This is going to be reviewed at the highest levels because any helmet system failure in SEAL operations is taken extremely seriously. Your data will be critical to understanding what happened and preventing it from happening again. I understand. Good. Jake turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. And Sarah? Thank you for the early warning. Those few seconds of heads up made the difference. I was already moving toward Thompson's position because of your alert. Without it, I wouldn't have been close enough to catch him. He walked away before Sarah could respond, leaving her alone with her equipment and her thoughts. She sat there for a long time, watching the recorded footage over and over, analyzing every detail of the failure sequence. This was no longer just about doing a good job or building her career. This was about understanding exactly what had gone wrong so it could never happen again. ZE of rooms and corridors designed to simulate various operational environments. Sarah was stationed in an observation position with ballistic glass separating her from the active training space. She could see and hear everything while remaining protected from stray rounds. Her equipment monitored stress points on the tactical vests, measuring how they distributed weight, protected vital areas, and held up under the physical demands of the exercise. Jake was running this drill personally, moving through the kill house with a group of candidates, demonstrating proper techniques, and then watching as they attempted to replicate what he had shown them. His movements were economical and precise, the product of thousands of hours of training and real-world experience. Sarah found herself mesmerized by the demonstration, momentarily forgetting to check her monitors as she watched him work. The drill was intense. Candidates burst through doors, engaged multiple targets, communicated constantly, and moved through the space with controlled aggression. The sound of simunition rounds filled the air, along with shouted commands and the thunder of boots on concrete. Sarah's instruments recorded it all, tracking how the vests performed under these demanding conditions.